Somebody asked me to do a thing on hardening our plants. Now these hanging baskets were hanging in the top of the greenhouse and they got a fair amount of sun. But if I took them and hung them like on that peg right there, where it's in the sun probably 6-7 hours of the day, they would get sunburned. They couldn't adjust. Here they will get more natural light, and the ones that were hanging, they got more sun. These other things that are inside here were underneath most of them were underneath the shelving, so they were protected and got very little light, but enough to keep them alive. It's obvious by the way you look at them, and you can tell they haven't been in a lot of sunlight. See, this should be sitting out on its own. It'll perk up once it gets a little light, and they definitely need a little water. Now, I raised my light tray up off the plants. I've got this cleaned off. I've taken all the baskets out. I've removed some plants in here, and they're outside. See, all these plants get a fair amount of sun, but most of these are jades. And if I put this jade outside, I would still put it in the shade for a while, maybe a week. Or after 4 or 5 days, move it a little closer to where it would get a little more sun. Slowly introduce it to the sun until it got full sun. Jade doesn't particularly need full sun sitting in the middle of the yard, but the other plants do. There's some hostas I didn't get in the ground last year, but I brought these out and set them under the shade. That little place over there gets mostly shade, a little bit of sun. Our azalea bloomed in the house this year. We've done it every year, and I really need to plant it in the ground. You can see one of the faded flowers is still left on there. And so when I brought it out the house, this thing's been in the house. It's not gotten any sun at all. You can tell it hadn't gotten any sun because look how long these new shoots are. It's stretching for the little bit of light that was there. If this had been outside, this shoot would be like that long. So I put it here under this tree. It gets some incidental light, and then I can move it from there over to there in a few days. Then I can set it on that deck in a few days. And azalea is a shade loving plant, so it doesn't need full sun, but it can survive in full sun. And then I'll move it to where it gets a little more sun and it'll pick up. And I'll probably try to bury it in the ground. If you watched me plant seeds last year, I planted this whole tray of hostas. I took some of them out and planted them in pots, and when they got bigger I put them in the ground. And I thought these were gone. These were sitting right there. You can see that empty spot of shelving, and it had 2 or 3 pots sitting on top of it. And I pulled the pots out, and I said, what's in that tray? And they've been sitting there under 3 pots about that size, and they're still trying to grow. Now, they're real skinny and long, but I got to put a little water on them. And I will just put water on them now because they've been stressed. Now in a few days, when it dries out, I'll put some on it with a half-strength Miracle Grow. But all these will pick up and perk up, and they might get leggy, but they go back to the ground every year. So next year, if I grow these in pots and I plant some in the ground, next year when they come up, they won't be leggy. They'll look like that. They're just leggy now, but I planted a few in the greenhouse, but I don't really need that. But see, if I took that and put it right out there in the middle of the yard where it got 6 hours of sun, it would burn them up. It would not be used to getting that much sunlight. Just like you going to the beach and falling asleep. If you fell asleep in the shade, you might be stiff laying on the beach. But if you laid out in the full sun, you'd be burned up. Well, that's what these plants are. Now, the guy that's been out on the beach all summer, he can do that because his skin is conditioned to being in the sun. These plants are not conditioned yet. And to harden them off, you just have to condition them. Now I will take my tomato plants and I'll put them on those tables, and they will be here, and you can see it on the videos last year. And I put a tarp over the top. I have to have a metal wooden cage around them of wire so that the squirrels don't dig them up and mess up with them. But I covered the whole top in the first 6 or 8 inches of the top with a tarp, because once these oak trees are leafed out, the sun will be blocked by them. And then when it gets overhead, it's directly down, so they're getting incidental light, and they harden off. And with a tomato plant, you can see the stems turn purple. When you put a tomato plant in the ground that's been hardened off, because I will do that, and then I will raise up the tarp to where it's just on the top, and then I will take it off for a couple hours a day. I know it's a lot of work, but it gives me great plants. And eventually, after maybe 2 weeks, maybe a little longer, depends on how many sunny days you had, I take the tarp off, and when I put them in the ground, they're used to being in the sun. And if you have tomato plants with heavy pink, purple looking stems, a cutworm cannot eat it. A cutworm can only eat those translucent light green stems that haven't really been hardened off. So that's it about hardening off. Well, earlier I wanted to add this to the hardening video. I was just hanging things up here and trying to get them out of the greenhouse, and I put some spider plants on this side. Well, you can see there's a ton of sun on this side, so I moved them to the back. Spider plants, or airplane plants, more people call them spider plants than anything else, they like incidental light. They do not like direct sunlight. I have a bay window there. If I hang that up near the very top, it will get some sunlight, but not direct light. It likes like filtered indirect sunlight. They were actually getting too much in the greenhouse hanging from the top of it. Now I can bring those out after they've been out here for a week, 10 days, and move them to maybe that post where they'll get some light, and I could bring them to this back little hooks where they get a little sun in the morning, but past noon they wouldn't get any more. They just don't need to be in sunlight all day long. And being over the winter like that one we were talking about earlier, it's a little peaked looking simply because it's been getting too much light, and it was coming off the winter resting period.